your home with BuildAid on Mix 93.8. Proudly brought to you by AfriSam. AfriSam, creating concrete possibilities.
BuildAid on Mix 93.8 FM. Good evening. My name's Graham Alexander. In the studio, Kay and Simon looking after the desk. I'm going to be chatting to our resident attorney, Chantelle Gladwin. We haven't seen Chantelle for a while. Had a little one a couple of months ago.
Very successful.
Fantastic. Kay, what else are we doing?
Okay, I've got something very cryptic tonight for you. I did try it out on Ian, who's the quiz master, and even he got a bit confused, so I'm going to give you 2 clues. I'm looking for a song tonight, and here are 2 clues for you. Listen carefully. If you're in between a guy called Jerry and a guy called Joe, and you're worried you might fall off your chair, where are you and who are you with? And if you're not sure why you're here, and there's a clown on one side, where are you? Simon's just got it, I'm sure, because he's giggling.
Clues.
Very cryptic. If you know what we're talking about, it's a song. SMS us on 41348.
This is BuildAid on Mix FM. Chantelle Gladwin, great to have you back.
Thanks for having me.
The little one is now 4 months old.
Almost 4 months, yeah. Her name
That's
is
amazing.
Aralia.
Fantastic. We're going to be talking legal things. So let's get straight into it. Chantelle, something that's popped up in our business a lot over the last year is people coming to us and various architectural practices looking to get plans drawn because they now want to sell their home. And I think a lot of it's been motivated, I wouldn't want to use the word instigated, but motivated by estate agents. Saying, if you're going to sell the home or you want to buy a property, find out what's going on the property. And we land up with some shocking statistics, like no plans, or the home that's on, or the drawing of the it's not the drawing.
Not built a plan.
Yeah.
That's it.
So my first question to you, Chantelle, is let's assume there are plans. So they're not non-existent. And I don't know, as a buyer, I've never heard of a building line. I might not even sure of what a plan is. I buy the home, and a couple of months later, I want to add on or do something, and I find out that this is illegal. I've gone over a building line, or it should be 2 stories. 1 story, and it's 2 stories. So it's not in terms of town planning or building regs or what have you. What happens next?
So any of the things that you've mentioned, where, for example, the building isn't built according to the plans registered on file at the council, or there's an encroachment onto your neighbour's property, or over a servitude, or over a building line, as you mentioned, these are all what we call defects with the property. So usually these defects are described as latent defects, which means that they are not apparent when you do an inspection of the property. And as you mentioned earlier, as a home buyer, you wouldn't necessarily know that these things exist until sometime down the line when you discover them by accident. So your legal recourse in this case depends on what the terms of the sale agreement say. So most sale agreements will have a clause in it called a Footstoots clause. Now, basically, this clause means that you buy the property in the state it's in and you take it as is. So if you buy the property and there aren't registered plans on file, then you're buying the property as is without the registered plans on file. Now, the trick is, as a buyer, to know what you're getting yourself into. Because if you're signing a sale agreement where you're buying the property as is, you do want to investigate these things beforehand. So go down to the local municipality or ask your agent to do it for you. Some conveyancers will do it for you as well. Go and check the building plans, check the zoning, check the title deed conditions. Check all of these things first to make sure that you are aware of the regulatory state of the property before you sign your sale agreement. Because once you've signed, it may be too late to do anything about it if you're unhappy with what you find.
A little later, Chantelle, I want to get into the responsibility as a purchaser in these transactions. But before we go there, maybe we can just go through a couple of the defects or the possible defects, like a town planning defect. What would a town planning defect be?
So the most common one that I've come across in my practice is encroachment on building lines. So every piece of property has what we call a building line, and basically it's a theoretical line that is determined by the municipality in its town planning scheme. And it runs along the borders of the property. So it's usually, say, 2.5 meters or 3 meters or whatever the case may be along the edge of the property. And this building line exists so that you never build a property over that line. So you you always have a space of, let's say, 3 meters, for example, between your building and the neighbor's property. And this is to prevent any health issues like the spread of fire or the spread of disease or anything like that, but also to prevent noise nuisance to the neighbor and privacy nuisance to the neighbor. So that's a town planning problem. You might also find, for example, that you buy a guest house, let's say, and the guest house happens to be zoned as residential 1. Now, residential 1 doesn't necessarily allow for a guest house. So in that particular instance, you've actually bought a property which is operating illegally because you don't have the right zoning for that. That's also a town planning issue.
A second dwelling is something that pops up as well, and a lot of properties have got third dwellings, where that's also a town planning issue. You don't have the right to have 2 dwellings on one property.
Yes, in most cases, your residential zoning will only allow 1 dwelling per property, but you can apply to amend this to have more dwellings, but you actually usually need to make an application for that needs to be approved by the municipality first.
We had a case, and we discussed it on radio just recently, where someone had bought a residence with 3 properties in it, and they were all being rented out. So it was an income-producing investment, but they hadn't been registered, they hadn't been approved, and that can cost as much as 80 to 90,000 rand.
Absolutely.
To get that approval,
and even more if you get nailed with fines by the municipality.
Yeah. So buying a property and you're not checking out the second dwelling could cost you a lot of money to correct it.
You really, as a buyer, property is a very expensive investment. If you're going to get into that game, you need to know what you're doing, and you need to get the right advice from the right professionals before you make that commitment.
So if there are huge accounts with councils, and something's almost gone wrong there because they didn't cut you off. So this has gone on for years, and suddenly somebody owes
2 million rand,
millions. And now they want to transfer this to the new purchaser. Do you find a lot of it in bigger properties like townhouses, community type properties,
Yes.
Industrial properties and so on, and not just your normal homeowner?
Yes. So the municipality calls them large consumers, and you get large electricity consumers and large water consumers. And the majority of very large billing problems are definitely electricity and water related, and definitely on very big commercial or industrial properties, and then on sectional title complexes or homeowners associations with many units. In Joburg, there are quite a few developments which have upward of 200-300 units. I've even seen 495 units. We had a problem there where they had a bill of 18 million rand that we had to deal with because it was incorrectly billed.
Sure. Chantelle, sort of in the framework of what we've been talking about this evening, is how do I avoid this problem? I'm buying a new property and I don't want to pick up this debt. Now we know the legalities are coming right, but in the interim I don't need this problem. How do I avoid that?
Well, part of the due diligence process that we advise that you should do, not only to protect yourself from the repercussions of the municipality trying to hold you liable for the seller's debts, which it shouldn't do, but you just never know with municipalities, but also to make sure that the deal goes through relatively smoothly, is to check what debt is owing. Let's say you do a search and you find that there's 2 million rand owing. And the seller, says, well, I don't have 2 million rand. I can only afford 1 million rand. So I'm going to get what we call an abridged clearance. And I'm only going to pay the charges incurred in the 2 years prior to transfer, which means there's going to be 1 million rand attached to the property. So henceforth, it will be attached to the property, even though the property is in your name. But don't worry, there's a judgment which says they can't do anything to you. That's cold comforts in my mind. I would rather check that out and not go forward with the deal if I had any concerns about that. Also, it's going to delay transfer if there are problems getting rates clearance and if the seller can't afford to pay it. And you also don't want to be sitting in a situation where you're waiting 6 months or 12 months or 18 months for transfer because the seller can't afford to pay his rates.
Yeah. So the loud message is be careful. Do some homework before you purchase a property. Remembering that a vacant piece of land can also have a couple of problems.
Absolutely.
So go and check it out as well. The beacons might be in the wrong place. In fact, your neighbor may be on your property. So do your homework. Kay, how do we do?
I'm so impressed with everyone out there because just about everyone got it right. So the song we were looking for is Stuck in the Middle with You, and that's Steeler's Wheel. And the thing that might have confused you, I said you're in between a guy called Jerry and a guy called Joe. It was written by Jerry Rafferty and Joe Egan. A lot of people think that perhaps Bob Dylan wrote it, but he didn't. So we're going to play out with stuck in the middle with you, and you'll realize it wasn't that cryptic because there are clowns and jokers and scary stares and all those things in the lyrics.
There you go. Thanks to Ian, thanks to Simon on the desk, and Kay for looking after all of us. But a special thanks to you, Chantelle. Thanks so much for coming and chatting to us again.
Oh, thank you guys. It's so nice to be back.
I look forward to the next time. So up next is the greatest show on earth. Stay tuned. It really is great. And we do this every Wednesday between 6 and 7. Chat to you next week. Ciao.
I got the feeling that something ain't right. I'm so scared.
Your home with BuildAid on Mix brings you all sorts of interesting info about building. Graham Alexander chats to different guests every Wednesday evening between 6 and 7. Proudly brought to you by AfriSam.